when like a new Asian person enters the group, there's always that period at the beginning where I'm like, I don't know how this person's perceiving me. I'm very self-conscious of that. My perception is that they're viewing me as like a guest in this Asian culture. And it's awkward because there's levels of truth to that, but there's also like, this is the cultural context that I am most familiar with. Okay. So whenever people say like, oh, like you don't look Asian at all, I know there's no like malice behind it, but some part of me has a really hard time not receiving that as the place that you feel the most at home of all the available options, you don't belong to that place.
Ooh. Yeah. Whoa, that really...
Being biracial presents some unique challenges when it comes to cultural identity.
Today, with special guest Lyn, we unpack all of the ways that our cultural identities have come under siege. Let's get into it. Hello, welcome back to another episode of Vulnerability Check.
Hello.
Hello.
So you might notice that we have a third person on today, who's one of my very, very dear friends. Lyn and I met about 6 months ago. We met at a very unusual climate event. So both of us have pretty deep, specific interest in climate change and, you know, ideally the ways to prevent it or to slow it down. But since then, we've spent a ridiculous amount of time together through spending time together actually in this space. This is South Park Commons. This is like an incubator space in San Francisco. And we've been exploring, trying to start some kind of venture together that we're still figuring out. But the reason I wanted to bring on Lyn today is that I very rarely get the chance to talk about some of the weird emotional baggage that comes from thinking through identity issues when you're biracial. So I'm half Chinese and half British, and I grew up in Canada. And Lyn, do you want to talk a bit about what you view your cultural background as?
Sure. So I am half Israeli and half Thai. I was born in Israel, and then I moved to the United States when I was 7. So I moved to California, which is why I sound the way that I do. That's the strong California accent.
You always like say that you sound like a Valley girl, but I don't get that from you at all.
Really?
Yeah. Do you get this?
No.
Oh, amazing. Maybe it's softened over time, but I used to say like maybe every other word. And there was a little bit more of like and more vocal fry.
Yeah.
I think that it's probably softened over time though, because you know I haven't really lived consistently in SoCal in about 10 years now, so it's softened.
When I think of the Valley girl accent, I mostly think of the really frequent like you just mentioned, and then the really aggressive uptalk at the end.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So I think that I've actually really trained the uptalk out of my voice. And I think that part of that is I really didn't want to be perceived as very girly growing up. I was really tomboyish growing up. And I perceived the uptalk as very feminine. And so I actually, for a lot of my teen years...
Which was spent where again?
Those were in SoCal.
Gotcha.
So this is when I was picking up the like and everything else. And I spent a lot of those years actually really being deliberate about speaking in one of the like lower natural tones of my voice, and trying to maintain what I thought of as pretty masculine speech patterns. And that has really changed over the last few years. I think that my voice has really adopted a much more light, like literally higher pitch and a lighter tone. I think I have adopted more playful, more feminine mannerisms in my speech. So
yeah,
interesting.
I don't really think about your mannerisms as being particularly like overtly masculine in any ways, except that you call everyone dude. That is the one exception, that you call everyone, regardless of gender, dude.
Dude is a gender neutral term. I'll throw hands over there. Yeah, no, I think of dude definitely as a gender neutral term. I definitely think that's a result of growing up in SoCal. If you ever say dudette, I think that's just a really surefire way to probably out yourself as Midwestern, I'm thinking. You know, like it's got the that same what's that meme that you always refer to? It's like, what's up, fellow kids?
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's got the same energy as that.
Right.
If you call someone a doodad, it's like, what's up, fellow surfers?
Yeah.
You know?
Immediately out yourself.
Right, yeah. So that's probably where dude comes from. That's also SoCal. But anyway, the whole point is that I grew up in Southern California.
All of that's to say.
We're doing so good.
So good.
Very on topic already.
So good.
So
Okay.
okay, how do you think that your relationship to cultural identity has shifted, like from growing up in Israel to SoCal to being here?
Before we jump into it,
Yeah.
I would like to see how everyone is feeling
Oh shit.
Oh,
before we dive in.
Yeah.
you're right.
Yes.
I can't believe we both forgot this.
Yeah, I'm very good at forgetting very
Okay.
basic facts about how our own podcast works.
Like my name, also.
Ouch.
are we gonna cut that part?
I don't know, man. The zinger. Ow. I felt that. No pun intended. Yeah. You want to start? Time check.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm coming in feeling very high energy and nervous, in part because I just got roasted for not knowing how to pronounce Lynn's last name, despite spending like possibly thousands of hours together at this point.
Wow.
It's one of those things where I'm like, it's too late to ask. It's just awkward now.
Right, yeah.
Like it's way too late
Way
at this
too
point.
deep.
I should definitely already know this.
True.
But this particular circumstance forced my hand.
That's the real reason why you're here.
So
Yeah, this moment.
I'm feeling very sweaty right now.
Oh no. Wow.
But otherwise very excited to talk about this because this is like a thing that has been on my mind for a very, very long time. It's come up in different ways in the pod in the past, but has always been like in conversation with someone that doesn't have quite the same experience. So just like excited. Yeah, I think like emotionally like a 7.5, physically like an 8. Where I'm at. Lynn, where are you coming in at?
Oh, I'm not gonna lie. I thought Kevin was going next.
Nope.
That's okay.
Okay.
Bring it directly to you.
Great. Amazing. I'm physically also feeling a little bit sweaty. I think because we've like been belly laughing for like 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's not helping.
It's like a core workout. And so, you know, I would put myself at an 8 before the sweat, probably at like a 6.5 after the sweat.
Wow. You're exercising. Over
Yeah,
here.
I'm out here working out.
Wow.
And emotionally, I feel great. I'm feeling 8.5 emotionally.
Ooh.
I'm, you know, I really love spending time with both of you. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of the pod.
Obviously.
And,
Obviously.
yeah, you know, I just feel so honored to be here. Truly.
Wow.
That was Valley Girl. That one, I felt it right there. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
Kevin.
What emotion are you feeling right now?
Oh, what emotion am I feeling?
Mhm. You have to give a word or words to it.
Let's see. I'm gonna take a quick pause to think about that for a second, actually, because I feel like I rarely actually have to explain how I feel. Jamie knows this. I communicate almost entirely with facial expressions.
Mostly eyebrows specifically.
So I rarely have to use my words to describe how I'm feeling. I think I'm feeling like some sense of curiosity as to what direction we're going to take the conversation about being biracial, because I think that there's a lot of different ways to approach it. And I'm feeling generally also cozy. You know, this space is very cozy, but I also think that like you two as people make me feel just very cozy. So yeah, I think those are the two feelings.
Aw. Very endearing.
Yeah.
Think I'm 8s across the board. I think, yeah, physically like an 8, emotionally like an 8. I feel delighted.
Ooh.
That's so good.
Yeah. You're all like delightful people. Very cheery, warm energy, which I appreciate a lot.
It's also a literally warm room.
It is literally a
true,
warm
too.
room, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, do you have your thermometer?
I do not. Oh, maybe.
Jamie and I have developed a new hobby. I'm sure you've heard of measuring the temperature pretty much everywhere we go.
No, I haven't.
Oh, well, we do a lot of temperature measuring.
Like literal temperature. So
Like
when we like do
like
the
Fahrenheit, Celsius.
right. Not like emotional energy.
But that's punny.
Right.
That could have been a pun.
I know.
Oh,
I know.
temperature. Oh,
I was trying to work it in and it just didn't quite.
I was like,
I didn't even realize.
Oh, yeah, no, it's-
That's crazy.
yeah,
Yeah,
right
no,
there.
it's
Yeah,
actually
we do
probably,
temperature checks. We also do temperature checks.
Yeah, we do temperature checks.
Yeah.
Actually, it's probably one of the sources of greatest tension in mine and Jamie's friendship. I think is
Celsius,
is
Fahrenheit?
Celsius Fahrenheit.
Ah.
Because every time that I'm like, oh, it's 75 degrees, he'll ask me, can you translate that to science units? And I'm like, sincerely, go fuck yourself.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
It's true though.
Yes, it's a great source of it's a great source of tension actually.
Mm.
Yeah. We fight a lot.
Oh yeah. I don't know. Like best founder relationships are like this. And I'm like, are they though? Mm.
Yeah, disparage your co-founders' units.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Go right for the throat. For the metric versus imperial.
I can't believe that that's called the imperial system. It's such a crazy name.
System of imperialism.
You have siblings?
Nope.
That was a very accented nope.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that.
You sound like a balloon.
Yeah. Yeah. Shall we?
Yeah. Okay. So going back to the topic that I rudely brought up without doing the regular procedure. I'm curious about how, as you've moved throughout these different places, how your sense of cultural identity has changed, and also like how much cultural identity is the thing you even think about.
Oh, interesting on the latter point. I guess, yeah, I'll start with the former. You know, I didn't think pretty much at all about cultural identity when I was in Israel. I don't think that was because I was in Israel. I actually think that it probably would have been much more pronounced as I got older in Israel because it's such a like not culturally, like racially homogenous place. But and also culturally, I guess. But I was so young that it's not something that I ever thought about. But you know, I thought of myself as an Israeli kid. Hebrew was my first language. When we visited Thailand when I was a little girl, I also saw myself as completely Thai. So that was the very rare, like those first probably 6-7 years of my life, I saw myself as like 100% Israeli and also 100% Thai. Whatever context I was in, I felt very comfortable being in both. I spoke Hebrew, I spoke Thai. I understood both comfortably. And it never occurred to me that I didn't quite look completely like either. Yeah, it's just not something that ever crossed my mind. I was barely even aware of the fact that I think I had a body and a face that were mine. I actually remember having a distinct moment where I was looking in the mirror, I was like, whoa, that's me. And it wasn't until I was maybe 6. So I think it's just, you know, the racial appearance never crossed my mind. And then I got to then I got to America. We moved to America under these sort of weird conditions where I wasn't entirely sure how long we were going to be in America. But I was surprised to find out that we had moved permanently to America, which was just a crazy prank to play on a kid. But
surprise.
Yes, surprise. Except like a surprise. Like a little bit more concerned, maybe. But I think that when it actually came up was I was accidentally enrolled in a Spanish immersion program.
What?
So
What?
get this. So we moved to the United States. We have been here. We moved in June. And school starts in, August, September. And so that summer, I don't know who this lady was. I don't even remember her name, but my parents hired some woman to teach me English. She didn't speak any Hebrew, so I literally just hung out with her all day, and she just spoke to me in English until I just picked up enough of it.
Right.
And I was constantly trying out different words, and I was mixing the languages a lot at that time. But by the time that I got to school, I was enrolled in first grade, which was the correct, they didn't hold me back or anything because of the language. But they, like, this was some weird random school. It was a very small school. They were really not well equipped, I think, to deal with immigrants. And they just put me in a Spanish immersion program. And I think it's because I was kind of like of brown skin and brown hair. And they were like, and it was Southern California. They were like, probably she's Hispanic of some kind. And so they put me in a Spanish immersion program. That got confusing for everybody very quickly. And so I learned some Spanish, learned some English, had a very thick Israeli accent still. I didn't really have much of a Thai accent, had a very thick Israeli accent. And in the process, there was like a several month period where I was speaking, any given sentence had, 3 to 4 languages in it. So there were actually 0 people in my life who could understand an entire sentence of mine.
Wow.
Which was very confusing for everybody involved. They eventually put together that I should not be in Spanish class, and maybe English would be a great place to start. And so that was the first time that I became kind of aware of the fact that I think like language became a sort of conduit for racial identity because of that experience. And then it got a little weird when that same school the next year, I'm from, my family's from Thailand, and another student had immigrated and enrolled at the school who was from Taiwan. And that school didn't know that those were different places. And so they literally put us together and they were like, hey, Lynn, this is your new buddy. You guys probably speak the same language. So you're going to show him around and like sit next to him and you're going to be friends. And we had to sit next to each other all the time. Neither of us spoke enough English to speak to anyone, let alone each other. And we didn't have any language in common. So, that's when I started to understand, like, something is different here. I'm different from my classmates. He is also different from my classmates. In what ways are we different in the same way?
Wow,
that was when I started to like put it a little bit together. I was like, okay, I think I made up a little differently than most people. I think most people didn't move here from somewhere else. So yeah, I think that's when things started. And then, the thing is with California is so like heterogeneous. There is so much racial mixing, I think, that happens here, that once I got English down and I got transferred to a much better equipped public school and, started talking the way that I do now, it just kind of melted away and I really became Southern Californian, and it didn't arise back up until 6th grade. This was crazy. In 6th grade, it was like middle school. It's like second day of middle school or whatever, right? And everyone sat at different lunch tables kind of by, like, obviously by group, but the groups were very racially divided.
Wow.
And so I'd made, like, on the first day of school, like a couple of Asian friends, and I made a couple of white friends, but there was 2 other mixed kids, and they were both boys. And so and I'd known them from elementary school. I sat with them on the first day of school, and that group of boys did not like that I was sitting with them. I think it was just because you're 11 years old, and the boys were like, ugh, why is a girl sitting with us?
Right.
And so on the second day, I was like, okay, who am I going to sit with? Because I can't sit with these 2 other kids that are obviously, like, I know that are mixed, right? I've seen their parents. And so I actually spent most of middle school flip-flopping between the tables. So I spent, like half of my day sitting with the Asian kids, half of my day sitting with the white kids, never really feeling like I fit in with either.
Wow.
Especially, the Asian table specifically, I felt like I had a really hard time fitting in because they weren't the same type of Asian that I was, right? Nobody was Thai. Pretty much everyone was Chinese or Japanese. And so they would actually like spend a lot of lunch speaking in Chinese or Japanese, and I would just kind of sit there at the side of the table, like silently. And I was like, I want lunch to be over, which is a bummer. But I think that's when I started to really embrace being like trying to kind of like be white, and I like hung out with, like, throughout high school, like pretty much entirely white friends. Jamie has seen, my current social circle. It's extremely white, like college, a very white social circle. And I think that was largely because I never really found, like, I never felt like, oh, the Asian side of me, like I never found very many Thai people. And so I was like, okay, the Asian side of me is not something that I can relate with people on. And the Israeli side of me, there were also not that much, but like Jewish people tend to be pretty proud. So I was like, okay, I could find some points of connection on Judaism, even though I'm not actually religiously Jewish. And then I could find points of, but there's like points of cultural connection. And the fact that I grew up in SoCal made it easy to pretend that I was just like, there was just some mixing somewhere down, earlier in the lineage. And I'm just a SoCal girl, So that was, that's kind of the arc. But Jamie, actually, I haven't heard this version of things for you.
Yeah, totally. Although, before we like immediately flip back to me, those experiences sound like you really went from your environment not really pushing you to think about like cultural background or race or language that much until you got pushed into like very specific weird situations where people were just like making assumptions about you that were overtly incorrect and shockingly geographically ignorant.
I'm like one
Thailand,
phone call.
Taiwan. Not, you can't just use prefixes of countries to make assumptions about similarity.
They're not even spelled the same.
That's true.
It's true. Not even actually that much of a
first syllable
phonetic prefix.
Kind of similar.
Yeah, that's all you get. Oh man.
It's kind of cool to hear that, well, in both ways, that like before you moved to America, it was like not even a problem. Like people kind of just embrace you, like there was no othering.
Yeah.
Until you came here.
Yeah, I think it was just, when you're little, you're spending so much time with your family. And I saw an Asian mom and an Israeli dad, and I was like, I kind of look a little bit like each of those. So, you never think about, the fact that on my Israeli side of my family, pretty much everyone has blonde hair and blue eyes, and so it's really, I don't know, it now going back, I'm like, oh yeah, probably as I would have gotten older, I would have noticed.
Right.
But because I was so young, no one's like, oh well, you're Asian, so you're not actually Israeli. Though my mom did actually really struggle with this. Apparently, I actually know this. In Israel, a lot of the service industry is staffed by Asian people that have immigrated there, specifically Thai people. And so a lot of people thought that my mom was my nanny for a really long time. And so people didn't treat her super well. And that was part of why she really wanted to leave Israel. So I imagine that it would have come up later.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
Sounds like you would have hit it eventually, but the migration to SoCal definitely accelerated the kind of realizations about the context. You're like, oh, like I am in fact not like everyone around here. And there's like a couple different groups of people that are kind of around here, but I'm not really part of any of those groups. And I think that like that feeling of like I'm not really part of any of these groups is like pretty fundamental to at least to my experience of like recognizing bicultural background, biracial background. So yeah, I definitely feel a lot of like empathy for that experience from very direct comparable things. So I grew up in Ottawa. Ottawa is like similarly pretty racially diverse. I grew up going through school with school was predominantly white, Asian, and then there was always like a mix of Middle Eastern folks as well. Although for whatever reason, I ended up definitely feeling much closer to the groups that were white and Asian predominantly. Although I think I also didn't really think about this at all until probably like middle school, like late middle school, early high school, where similarly there started to be a clear like bifurcation into these two different social groups. I think that probably it didn't happen right away, in part because from very young, the school I went to, it was like an academic theater program. So it was like people that were being pulled from all these different neighborhoods already into one place. So like people were all coming from like slightly different places, like their parents didn't know each other. So there was no pre-existing cliques. They all kind of like formed quickly at the beginning. And I think that also like a lot of our, like a lot of conversation just didn't really flow in that kind of direction growing up until like probably like 7th or 8th grade. I think the thing that really started to shift it for me was a combination of hobbies and like media exposure. I think honestly, like one really big shifting point for me was that I like ended up with this like huge crush on this girl, And then like I'm like, how do I spend more time with this person? She's like, well, she plays badminton. I can do that. So I started playing badminton because of this person. And
I didn't
then
know that.
oh yeah, badminton,
That's crazy.
badminton, and like my romantic history are very deeply intertwined in
Ooh.
surprising ways.
Mm.
And then through her, I think also was like just more drawn to watching anime as a way of having connection points. So I think that like my school similarly did have a lot, like a significant portion of Asian people and significant portion of white people, but everyone was speaking English. There was no like, I think most people there were not recent immigrants. They were mostly second generation, and the people that were first generation immigrated when they were very, very young, like when they were like 4 or 5. So there was just definitely more social fluidity between those groups. And then even in high school, there was definitely like pretty clear interconnection between the groups, but I think it really was like interest that ultimately caused concentration. As you might imagine, badminton club was extremely Asian and really specifically extremely Chinese. There was like Chinese group of friends. There was a bunch of Koreans that would hang out, a bunch of Japanese people that would hang out as well. But that was definitely the bulk of the badminton club, which ended up being like a huge portion of how I spent my time in high school. And then some of my other interests, for various reasons, also just tilted more and more in that direction. For instance, probably the nerdiest thing that I've spent a lot of time doing is competitive programming. Like, yeah, right, that expression. You're like, wow, that is very nerdy. So I spent a lot of time doing that in high school and early college, and those groups were almost entirely stacked with Chinese people. It was Chinese people, and then there was actually like a very small number of Jewish people. That was basically the entire crowd. So I think over time, because of the combination of like early preferences revealed through dating, and just my interests drawing me, my social circle started shifting more and more towards the Asian side of things. So, and unlike you, I think that people have very different opinions when they meet me. Some people are like, oh, you're obviously half Asian. Whereas other people, when they meet me, they're like, you're not fully white? And they like cannot believe it. Like it breaks their brain. And I get that from actually both from white people and from Chinese people. So it's not like a thing that's like just lack of exposure. Usually the only people that like are able to identify it are other half Asian people and barbers, because I've had I think twice I've had barbers like in the middle of a haircut. They're like, "Are you part Asian?" Like they're just confused because like this hair makes no
hair
sense.
texture?
Like what is going on? This is not the right texture.
That's so funny.
But in high school anyway, I definitely did notice myself floating between these two different groups, where I had like a group that was interests very centered around more Asian cultural things, and a group that was very not that, and always feeling a little bit out of place in both. Like just visually, I stick out when I'm in Asian crowd, but then if I'm in a very white crowd, I feel very out of place for like cultural background reasons, even though my actual household was not very Asian centric. So it's kind of strange in that visually I look totally white. My background growing up was also like in most ways a very Western upbringing. Like I did not have like really intense tiger parents pushing me in a certain way. I also didn't grow up with like just Chinese food in my house. It was like a very eclectic mix. My dad did all the cooking, but he was pulling through inspirations from all over the world because he like taught himself how to cook, and he like went to college in England. So it was just like a very confusing mix of influences that still makes it hard for me to explain my cultural background in a way. But I've always felt like a little bit out of place in both like very, very intensely Asian communities and like very intensely white communities.
Mm-hmm.
And I've generally found my place the most clearly in like the way that I'll frame it is like slightly whitewashed Asian American communities. So like
Happy to be of service.
yeah, it's like there's still like some tethers to some parts of the cultural heritage and history and like still identification with it, but also not like truly traditional version of that. So yeah, I mean, like, I think both of you are in some ways that, like, you both have, like, some specific tethers to that. I think that, like, on the spectrum, you're not in quite the same place.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, Kevin, you obviously have, like, feel very deep ties to Asian culture.
Mm-hmm.
But you've also, like, never been to Asia.
Yeah, like on paper, if you didn't like look at me or like look at my name, you wouldn't know because I was like, yeah, born and raised in Toronto, and I've only basically been in North America or
Yeah.
to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. And then, like, Lynn, you spent a lot of time, you mentioned, with your friend group, like, just in purely white communities. But, like, you still understand Thai.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, if you go to Thai restaurants, you can, like, still read things out in the correct pronunciation, for instance.
Yeah, like I can haggle.
Yeah.
the gold standard.
The gold standard, yeah.
My mom's like, as long as you can handle and you could, or haggle and order food for yourself, we'll be okay. She doesn't expect me to drive when we're in Thailand though, because they drive on the opposite side of the road. So the bar is really low for me, to be fair. But yeah, there's yeah, it's like I think I've had a lot of direct, like, I have a lot of direct familial connections to Thai culture. I was raised predominantly by my mom. Once we moved to the United States, my dad spent most of his time in Israel still.
Oh.
And so, like she definitely took an Eastern approach towards raising us. And it was just really incongruous though to have this like Eastern approach, but not the same Eastern approach that a lot of my like Asian classmates had. So it still was not a point of connection. Like I couldn't find anywhere to kind of like to fit that. Yeah, exactly. And so it just felt like this weird third arm sort of, like on me as a person where I was like, I like walk around every day and I'd be like, okay, like, it's like I have my identity at school and, like mostly hanging out with white friends, doing white things. And then, like I had some Asian friends, but I didn't have any ways to relate to them. But then I had this weird extra thing that I couldn't connect with anybody on. And that was like the very specific brand of like Eastern upbringing that I had. And, like, yeah, I don't know. When you were describing, Jamie, like all the ways that you're the ways that you're Asian and the ways that you're white, and then I almost watched you like I feel like tangled in it, which is how I feel like I feel every time that I'm trying to explain the parts of me that are this and the parts of me that are that. Sorry, that just immediately reminded me of Eugene's cats.
One of my roommates, Eugene, has 2 cats, and the cats' names are this one and that one.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah, the names of the cats are this one and that one.
The eye roll.
That can't be right. Anyway.
Sorry, as soon as I said it, I was like, my brain went right off in the tracks. I was like, there's no recovering from this. But okay, in an attempt to recover from that, it feels very difficult to try to communicate. Oh yeah, these are the concrete ways that I can track Asian influences, and these are the concrete ways that I can track white influences, because they end up feeling really messy. Because one of the weird things that I noticed is sometimes, I think this is entirely not a hot take. This is probably extremely unremarkable, but just, you feel you're most Asian when you're around white friends, and you feel you're most white when you're around Asian friends.
Totally.
Right? It's not like being around Asian people makes you feel more Asian. It's like you actually notice all the ways that you're not Asian.
Yeah,
you notice all the ways that you're white. And so it's like being around, it's very hard to attribute, oh yeah, like these are all the ways in which I'm white. I hang out with my white friends, because when I hang out with my white friends, they often ask me to make Thai food, So it's like, that's when I actually get to share a lot of Asian culture. And so it's just I think that there's a lot of messiness to it. I think that there's a lot of tropes that you see in like literature and in movies, and there are more and more half Asian characters. And I think the thing that you always see is, there's these kind of like clean, quippy lines that are like, oh, half of each and whole of nothing. That's the very classic thing. But it doesn't get into all the ways that it's like, they're not clean halves. They're very messy halves. And they're like, there's a lot of tension between them, and they fight, and there's not, I think, yeah, it's hard to describe all the ways like you are one thing or the other.
When you talk about like, I guess having within each group, it's like almost the unique traits are the ones that you really notice, and that's where you see the differences.
Mm-hmm.
What are some examples?
Of the sorry, can I do a clarification or
Mhm.
question clarification? Examples of the traits that I notice in my friends or
In yourself?
in myself
Yeah.
when I'm with, let's say, like the Asian traits that I notice with when I'm around my white friends,
Mhm.
for example.
Mm.
Okay, gotcha. Um, it comes out, I think, in a million small ways for me. I think it's rarely any one big thing. Um, the very classic one that happens, 3 times a week is when white friends come over and try to wear their shoes in my house.
Yeah.
Like chase them around, like take your shoes off.
I thought about that immediately as well.
Yeah.
Although
like,
I would say that I'm fairly confident that's specifically an American thing, because
Mm.
Canadians also would not do that.
oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, that says whatever you want to interpret about America in that way. Jamie takes his shoes off at my house, and you also know. Things are getting real serious here because Jamie has left a shoehorn at my apartment.
Mhm.
That's pretty serious.
It hangs on my shoe rack.
Nice.
But yeah, no, I think the shoes is a classic example. When we go out to eat, people will be like, "What do you recommend?" I'm like, "This is not my ethnicity. I don't know." Like, I'm not from wherever they make Szechuan food, and the little things around like how spicy, somebody can eat, that sort of the chopsticks. I don't know. A lot of it comes out around food. I think a lot of it does come out around small comments about tiger parents and that sort of thing. And yeah, just like even little things like hair, a lot of my kind of like blonde white female friends have hair ties that couldn't fit my bangs in them.
Oh, wow.
And so it's just a bunch of little things that end up coming out, I think.
So interesting.
Yeah.
I'm asking because like I grew up in Canada, but like surrounded by Chinese people. Like 90%, I think,
Mm.
of my like high school was like Chinese, basically.
Whoa.
Yeah.
What conditions led to that being the case?
I was just raised in this suburb called Markham, and it's where like just a crap ton of Chinese immigrants just flock there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think my school specifically, I went to a Catholic high school actually, so there's actually a significant population of Italians as well. But
Well,
that
what a
was like
mix.
basically the big two groups. There was kind of the Italians, and then there was like the Chinese people, and then there was like a small sliver of like we had some Indian folks and some like black folks, but that was basically the gamut. So I was kind of raised that way, very culturally ingrained.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've actually always had a hard time like broadly like relating to white people because I have like none of that. Like I have small bits of it, like
Whoa.
TV shows and like movies, but like that's basically it. Like
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay. This is really interesting because it's almost like the flip experience that I had, right? Where on paper you look like you should have a much whiter experience, right?
Yeah.
And I on paper look like I should have a much more Asian experience, but you actually like came from a densely Asian community, right?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so tell me, I'm just like, sorry, I'm just trying to picture that. Did that make you feel more Asian or less Asian?
More Asian. I think my like friction was actually encountering like at some point later in my life, like honestly, like growing up, super Asian bubble, um, Waterloo, also a significant Asian population, especially in like engineering, and just most of the STEM subjects. I think it was like towards the tail end of that I met some people who I guess were not like Asian American or like Asian Canadian, and they were like actually from Asia. And that was the first time, like in my mind, I'm Asian, like that, because I was in the bubble for so long. It was when I like actually met somebody that was like from like China. They're like, you are not Chinese at all. And I was like,
Whoa.
yeah, I felt personally attacked.
Yeah.
The first couple of times that happened. Because I was like, wait, what? No way.
Oh my
But
gosh.
yeah, so I had a different realization to them. Like all the ways that I was a little bit American or Canadian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, this is actually a point of interest for me, for both of you. You were saying like, oh, I felt personally attacked, right?
Mhm.
Which is comical, but I think actually kind of gets at some of the feelings that, of like, oh, the like, oh, well, how Asian are you actually, right? And so I'm curious about the emotional responses that you have towards like when maybe your identity as an Asian person is threatened, right? Or maybe for you, Kevin, it would be more like Asian person versus Canadian person, right? Jamie, for you, it would be like Asian person versus white person, probably generally,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I'm curious to hear about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, one of the things that's interesting to me about this kind of cultural struggle is I think oftentimes people feel threatened in their identity in a very specific direction, and it's fairly consistent.
Mhm.
So like, I have never once been like someone being like, "Oh, you're not like really British." I'm like, I'm just not. That's like I have British blood, but like I just don't care about that. And also, literally, no one has ever tried to challenge me, being like, "You're not really Canadian." Like that's also just like not
Mhm.
a real thing that comes up. So for me, it's like very specifically like people would never directly say it, that they don't think I'm Asian, but they definitely will tell me directly, "You don't look Asian." Uh, and I think that like at some point, I realized pretty clearly that the thing that I felt attachment to was not being Asian; it was being like Asian American, Asian Canadian. So I think that like a lot of, I mean, you can probably talk more about this, but I think that a lot of Asian Canadians and Asian Americans, their tension is that among white people they feel too Asian, and among like people that grew up born and raised in Asia, they feel like not truly Asian. They feel like more whitewashed.
Mhm.
So they're like trying to like justify their existence in Asian community, whereas I feel like I try to justify my existence in like Asian American community. So like part of the weird thing about being biracial in the States is that like I feel like I'm on the periphery of two groups, but it's not the periphery of Asian and white. It's on the periphery of like Asian American and like like white Canadian. And like that's like the weird thing.
Mhm.
So part of when people talk about, for instance, being like third culture kids, that doesn't quite describe my experience. I almost feel like I'm an imposter third culture kid,
Whoa.
which is like a really strange place to inhabit
right.
that like I don't really know how to articulate exactly.
Mhm.
Which is why I really appreciate it when there is actual media that explores this a little bit. Like the line you quoted, like half of two things, whole of nothing.
Mhm.
That's like a little bit how I actually feel. Because there isn't like quite the same kind of critical mass that you need to create truly a third culture. Because like there is a lot of media now that is distinctly Asian American culture. Like
Right.
like Wong Fu is like distinctly Asian American culture. Like Crazy Rich Asians is not. I mean, that wasn't even popular in Asia. People in Asia watch Crazy Rich Asians and they're like, "What is this? This is weird." But it's because it's like distinctly Asian American culture. It's like Shang-Chi also like distinctly Asian American.
Right.
So there's all these things to rally behind that feel like, okay, like these other two things I feel pulled between are not me, but like this is me. And like it's so rare for me to find something that like I feel that way towards. So I kind of just like feel an imposter in all of these different arenas, which is like, yeah, that's the kind of uncomfortable tension I feel.
Whoa.
And I think that it comes up most strongly in situations where, like, I think that now, if I'm hanging out with predominantly Asian friends, I think I just do feel culturally at home for the most part. But it's like when like a new Asian person enters the group, there's that period at the beginning where I'm like, I don't know how this person's perceiving me. I'm very self-conscious of that. My perception is that they're viewing me as like a guest in this Asian culture. And it's awkward because there's
Whoa.
levels of truth to that, but there's also like this is the cultural context that I am most familiar with.
Right.
So whenever people say like, "Oh, like you don't look Asian at all," I know there's no like malice behind it, but some part of me has a really hard time not receiving that as the place that you feel the most at home of all the available options. You don't belong to that place.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Whoa, that really.
So like that's when I feel personally
That's
attacked.
very poignant. Yeah.
Yeah. How does this crop up for you, Lynn? Or what was going on for you while you were listening to that?
Just the idea of like, oh, the thing that you view as closest to home is not like you're not welcome there almost, or like you like you don't belong there. I think
Right.
is very like that's extremely poignant. And I think that the most difficult thing is it's like even, like even once you resolve that in that context, like if you get like there's always the threat of it coming back. Like you're never fully secure in that. Like I don't know. And this is one of the things that I wanted to ask about. Like it's something I really don't have an answer to. So I guess it's kind of like a cop-out question because I was like, you have notes I can copy. But it's like this idea of, okay, what is it that's going to fix that, right? Like if like what is it that those folks have that I don't have? And is it literally just the way that you look, right? Or is it a specific, for me, it's always felt like a specific brand of Asian. Like, because I feel extremely similar to that. But for me, it's felt like, oh, I don't really identify with Asian American culture because like, I'm not the right kind of Asian.
I'm guessing there's not a whole lot of like Thai American culture.
Yeah, the closest thing
Thai
is
American like media.
Yeah, the closest thing is people being like, I like pad thai. I'm like,
Sick. Great.
like, Mazel
That-
tov. It's just, I don't know. It's very, I don't know. It's weird trying to figure out like what is it like. Okay, there's a thing that I should be able to fit into, right? Or in your case, you're like, I actually literally fit in here. But what is it like? What's that point of It's almost like the club that like the like that exclusivity. Like, what is the bouncer looking for? Why can I not? Like, what is it about me? I think for me, it's the brand of Asian. Maybe I don't know if it's for you. It's the fact that you like look more white.
Yeah. This is interesting. It also like is revealing just like how many different dimensions of this there really are. Like there's
spectrum,
you grew up in you grew up in like a very intensely Asian area where it was honestly like Asian culture fairly well preserved. In some ways weirdly more preserved than it is in its actual native home of Hong Kong.
Right.
And then so for you it's like almost geographical.
Yeah.
And then for me, it's like being in between these things and looking very white, but still like my cultural background is in fact very similar a few generations ago as many of my friends. As for you, it's just like there's a Thai to Asian, but Thai is not like there's a lot of very important cultural differences between Thai and the predominantly like Chinese and Japanese cultures that you see around you. But all those things is like there's like feelings of tension that make it hard to feel like we fully belong. And I think that like one of the two things that have actually been most helpful for me, one of them is just, this goes back to things we talked about before, is just accepting the truth. And like one thing that is true is that I look much whiter than I am Asian. And that I am not fully Asian. Like no matter, even ignoring the aesthetic facet of it, just accepting that like I don't look that way. And there are some ways in which my upbringing was not Chinese. And there's some ways in which like I am just always going to be a little bit different. That's one thing. The other thing that I think was surprisingly helpful is just recognizing how much diversity there is in cultural connection, even among these groups of friends that I kind of viewed as monolith in a certain way. So this is a very weird roundabout way of getting to that point, but it was spending such a long time intentionally learning Cantonese and then coming back and realizing how varied my friends' familiarity and skill level in language actually is, and starting to recognize that it's not that like there's me in the middle or there's me that has no Chinese background and then everyone else fluent. It's that there's like now there's like me that like knows a little bit. There's a bunch of friends that know a little bit. There's friends that are like can speak fluently but can't read or write at all. There's friends that can understand fluently but they have a really hard time articulating now. And for all of them, like their cultural experiences with their parents and how much their parents feel like connections still to Asia, that's also varied. So I think that it helped clarify how much of a gradient it really is, and that it's not about like there are these two discrete groups and I am awkwardly in the middle, or there's three discrete groups and I'm awkwardly between two of them. And I think that helped me feel more at peace, both those things, because I just don't feel the same kind of tension now when there's like a new person coming into the group, and I feel this sense of like, oh, are they gonna judge me? Um, because I recognize kind of the truth of the situation in many different facets of that. Yeah.
Yeah. That is like when you broke down all of the pieces, all the different ways that people end up landing on the spectrum, like, oh,
Yeah.
this is how much, like this is people's relationship with, like the language, and like
Yeah.
how much this actually was a component of their lives at home. It is very easy to kind of find that like most like the quote unquote like purist version, right, of the, like the racial identity that you're like, oh well, that's that side of the spectrum. Everybody falls there, right?
Yeah.
And it's very easy to distance yourself and find all the ways that you're different from that. And it's like I suspect probably everybody is feeling some degree of this, right? I mean, Kevin, you speak fluently. Wait, is it Cantonese? Okay, you speak Cantonese fluently, right? Okay, so how does that end up kind of like how does that end up triangulating you? Like it feels like a multi-dimensional, like
Totally.
sort of like not axis, but
Space.
Yeah, multi-dimensional space of where you can fall. But it's like actually, I wonder if this is even a thing. Is this a thing that ends up crossing your mind with frequency? Like, oh, my Asianness in relation to other people's Asianness.
I mean, it does in a way, because I don't know. I was raised like just very Chinese, and specifically to be proud of that fact. I think my parents are pretty proud Chinese people. So I think for me, I have strong ties to that, and then everyone I grew up with was also like first or second generation. So I was very like my entire community was like Chinese Canadian, basically growing up. I think, yeah, nowadays I've like come to like accept a little bit more of the truth, where it's like I am just like a North American person that was like raised in a Chinese culture, and I guess there are fundamentally some differences um, culturally with people who are like actually born and raised in Asia, in East Asia. Um, yeah, I think I mean, right now the way that it's received when people are like, "Oh, you speak Cantonese," is usually just like they're like impressed. They wouldn't expect me to know it. Um, yeah, although sometimes like in small interactions, if I don't have a prolonged conversation, because the thing is, I speak it, but I speak like a textbook kind of, because I learned all of my Cantonese in a classroom, and I've never been in the cultural context where like there's slang and like the language is like evolving and stuff. I don't have any of that, so I speak very straightforwardly. So if you have a conversation with me, you can kind of tell. You're like, oh,
that grammar's a little too good.
Yeah, it's a little too proper, a little too schoolboy proper. But in like short exchanges, I had recently was in Calgary, and I was walking by a bunch of tourists who were speaking Cantonese, and they were like taking a photo, and then I asked them in Cantonese, like, "Do you want some help taking the photo?" I was like, "Oh no, it's all good." And then as I'm walking away, I just heard someone make an offhand kind of like, "Oh, like that's a Hong Kong person," and I was like, "Oh, nice."
Hey, yeah.
But there is this weird kind of like, "Oh yeah, I blended in."
Like
I
bamboozled them.
Yeah, like I made it. I passed the test or something.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of weirdness there, language wise. Yeah, it's wacky.
And how does literacy like fall into that for you? So I actually don't know exactly what your reading and writing level is. My sense is that your character recognition is like among the better among my friends, but still would have a really hard time reading an actual book.
Yes, exactly. I think I usually ballpark it at like I can read like 40% of a newspaper.
Right.
And I can do basic texting in Chinese with people, but I do pull for Google Translate like
Right.
decently often. But like between what I know and it's also weird because like I like grew up with Cantonese, but then I also started learning Mandarin for a while, and then I like grew up with like traditional Chinese characters. But then around like when I was 9 or 10, I started doing simplified characters. So I just kind of have a hodgepodge. Like some words I know in Canto, some words I only know in Mando, and sometimes I know both. And so between all those little pockets with like somewhat overlapping pockets of knowledge, I can usually piece it together with Google Translate on the side. Like that's how it works. When I talk to people who are like just like Chinese is their first language.
That does seem like a distinctly Chinese experience.
Yes. Yes.
That one is.
You wouldn't run into that with Thai or Hebrew.
Yes, exactly.
Not a whole lot of mixing between Thai and Hebrew there.
No, or even like just within.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, it's they're like I have to piece together the different parts of this language. I'm like, oh, I got it so easy. Like when I'm doing Hebrew lessons, I'm like, these are like everything. There's only one version of this. You know? Like I'm not good at it, but there's only one version of it.
Yeah.
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 When you speak Hebrew to people, what kind of reactions do you tend to get?
It depends where. In America, everyone seems to be like, well, it's surprised pretty much across the board. In America, it tends to be surprised, but it's because like people are like, there's a lot of people that speak Hebrew, you know, but because they grew up Jewish, right? And so they can read characters and they know like prayers, and they know the terminology that comes along with being Jewish and the Hebrew that comes along with that. But you know, like they'll know how to say like, oh, do you speak Hebrew? I'm like, yeah, you know, like, do you speak Hebrew? And they'll be like, oh, no, you know, like,
wow.
you know, but so I think that there's a lot of surprise typically to find someone that speaks Hebrew, not necessarily that looks like me, but just that speaks a version of Hebrew that is not like Judaism driven. And then when I go to Israel, that is like a totally different. The last person that I dated, he also had blonde hair and blue eyes, and so when we were out with my family, it looked like he was actually the person that was like a part of my family, and I was maybe the significant other that was there visiting.
Yeah.
Whoa.
And so shop owners, 100%, like people, like waiters, whatever, like everyone would direct their speech to him, and then I would respond in Hebrew, and just the shock, you know, because there are, like I said, like there are Asian people in Israel, but they tend to be like fully like purely Asian people, and they're as part of the service industry, you know, and they speak Hebrew. Like there's a lot of like Hebrew lessons, but someone that looks like me, that looks like maybe she's sort of Asian, but I definitely don't look very Israeli. I've had very few people ever guess that I was Israeli, which is actually the thing that I think irritates me more than the Asian thing, because it's like, I mean, it's hard to be like, oh yeah, for sure Israeli, you know, like that's, so there's that, but it's, you know, like I definitely don't look Israeli, and the like people tend to be really surprised there. Locals tend to be really surprised there. They're like, how did you learn Hebrew? And I'm like, I'm from here, you know? And it's like even crazy, you know, at the airport, there's really, really tight security at Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. And like I use my Israeli passport when I move in and out of Israel. And that's for a while the only passport I had, you know? And like the Israeli guards would often be like, well, if you're from here, like, why haven't you been here in a long time? I was like, I moved, you know? And so there's a really, I don't know, I think that on the Israeli side, it ends up creating a little bit more tension than it does on the Thai side, you know? I don't think anyone expects me to speak Thai, and I never do it, because my Thai, like, speaking is very bad. Comprehension is really good, and aside from haggling, my speaking is pretty bad. But yeah, like, the mismatch between the expectations and the reality of the Hebrew tends to be a point of tension.
So I think that just like again highlights that most of us, I think, feel burnt in a very specific direction. It's not like, oh, you don't know all my identities. It's just like the feeling of being pushed out of the one you have the strongest identification with. So for you, it sounds like it's Israeli or Hebrew. When like people are like, oh, like you don't seem Israeli at all, and you're like, there's some tension. So I actually want to ask specifically about that. When you get those reactions, when people are very surprised, like what is emotionally happening for you in those presumably recurring experiences?
Yeah. And this is actually why I think it probably would have become an issue in Israel growing up there
Right.
if I'd stayed for longer. I think it depends on the brand of reaction, Some people, like if it's in the States, people are like, "Oh, you're Jewish." And I'm like, "No, I'm actually not Jewish, but I am from Israel." People are like, "Huh?" Like it's like does not compute.
Yeah.
And so that version of things, it's just like a little bit grating to have to like argue because people correct me. They're like, "Oh, you mean you're Jewish?" And I'm like, "No, I don't mean that actually." Thanks very much though, And like and that's actually really an extra point of irritation for me because I'm like particularly a bad Jew because when my mom moved us like here, she raised us Eastern. So I barely know anything about Judaism. Like I'm bad at being Jewish, even though technically on paper I'm Jewish. So like I'm like I don't identify with like religious Judaism. I like try to celebrate the holidays, but like the thing that really like I'm like the closest thing I have to any sort of like cultural anchor is being Israeli. And so when people try to replace that with a thing that I'm like, I'm definitely not that, I'm like, I find that like specifically strangely irritating and it's in a way that I'm like, I feel that with no other things in my life, And this is what's crazy is this is extremely different from my sister, who she's younger than me by a couple of years. So she was just about to turn 5 when we moved. And like she just like was not fully baked. She doesn't remember any. She wasn't even like 10% baked. She doesn't remember anything from Israel. She doesn't speak any Hebrew, like nothing. And so for her, she identifies so much more with the Thai side. She actually, yeah. And I told Jamie this. I think that Tall is my sister. Tall and Jamie look like they could be siblings, in my opinion. Like similar skin tone, similar like coloring and features. And so like imagine a very short female version of Jamie. Like that's what Tall looks like. But Tall looks much more Israeli than I do. She is a carbon copy of our Israeli grandmother in a lot of ways. And so it's just like a little bit frustrating because, I'm like when Tall and I go to Israel together, she has a very Israeli name. My name is Lyn. That's not Israeli. Nobody has any idea how I ended up with my name. Actually, we do, but it's not Israeli. But like, it's just like, my brothers are Avraham, Asaf, my sister's Tall, and I ended up with this like not Israeli name. I'm the one that looks most Asian in my family, and I'm the one that feels like most desperately I feel like I need the Israeliness, and I feel like I have the most tenuous kind of claim on it. Which in the family dynamic, Jamie has watched out play in some less than savory ways. Yeah, it's just when Israeli people are surprised, I am not surprised because I'm like, yeah, heard that. They're like, you're Israeli. I'm like, yeah, surprise. Like that's not shocking to me anymore. And I think a similar thread of acceptance and being like, okay, I don't look like my blonde-haired, blue-eyed family, and I, like I don't look like somebody that grew up in Israel in any way. And but then when I speak Hebrew with like a true Israeli accent, people are very surprised, It's actually created a point of pride for me because I've actually hung on to language specifically as a way to prove how Israeli I am.
Yeah, exactly.
And like speaking it with a good accent and being able to like write things out and like drive Israeli, streets and highways looking only at the like Hebrew road signs. Like that's the way that I seem to prove it to myself and others. But yeah, and then there are people in my own family that, like end up, arguing about how Israeli I am or am not. And that specifically hits home in a less delightful way, where it's just like, my brothers are half brothers and both of their parents are Israeli. So they don't have a Thai mom. And so it's sometimes used, I think it can be weaponized in a way to, to other people. Yeah. And so it's like, oh, well, you're not even really Israeli, so it's like, I'm like, we shared so much lineage.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I felt that. That hurt me too. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. When you're saying that though, like, this is making me realize that I have this similar thing where like I hate it when like I don't practice Chinese for a while and like my accent starts to go.
Mm. Huh.
Because it's the same thing. That's the only claim that I have. I've physically never been there. I don't know. I don't. I have some friends there, but like like family's all in Canada. Like, and the only thing that I have to prove that I'm one of you is that I speak the same language.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Because otherwise it's like, oh, it's your parents. It's not you, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Exactly.
you have to have some token to be like, no, see?
Right.
Receipts, proof.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
I've
Wow.
earned my way here.
That is true. Like, I always tell people now, like, I can't say that I'm from Hong Kong. I always have to say my family's from Hong Kong or my parents from Hong Kong. You know, it's like all these weird qualifiers that you have to like
Yeah.
Mhm.
add. Yeah.
So I've an interesting specific thing. This is specific to Israel, but one of the things that every Israeli does for the most part is serve in the military.
Yes.
But because I moved when I was so young, I didn't,
Oh.
and
ooh.
so one of the things where it's like, I can say like, oh, I'm from Israel,
Right.
but if people are then like, oh, so you served in the military, I'm like,
Like,
well, doesn't everybody have to?
Right.
Ugh.
And so it's like there's so many levels of proof, and like I think this is true for like pretty much every like nationality or like race. Like there's so many levels of proof that
Totally.
you could ask for, right? So it's like, oh well, like like, are you actually Israeli or are you just Jewish? No, I'm Israeli. Oh, are you from Israel? Yes. Well, did you serve in the and you could
Yeah,
even if you served in the
totally.
military, you could ask for more and more and more. And I think at one point I just had to be like, you know what? I am this version of it. to just have to try to be as comfortable as possible with that. But it can be definitely a point of, I think, difficulty.
Yeah. It's totally true that there are all these different levels of proof points, and I think like, well, first of all, like going back into the reactions you were getting from people when they're kind of like interrogating like your level of Israeliness, the sense I was getting is like that's a pretty frustrating experience, and like when that's happening, when the equivalent thing is happening for me, I both feel I feel a combination of anger and like I'm not sure if it's shame or just self doubt, but it's like something in that kind of realm. Is it also what's coming up for you?
Yes. I think that the shame, I've thought about this a lot. I think that the shame comes from feeling like okay, everybody reacts this way, so
Mhm.
maybe I'm the wrong one. Maybe I'm lying to everybody,
Oh.
and it feel like, yeah, so I think that the shame comes from, oh, I've been found out, I've been caught, which I go back and I evaluate. I'm like, no, I'm not lying, but
Yeah.
it feels like, I think that's where the shame comes from me, but I
Mm.
definitely empathize with like that, the idea of like the self-doubt and the like, it almost feels like some sense of embarrassment.
totally.
Just like, fuck, why do I have to like, why do I have to defend this?
Yeah.
Like it just feels like such a, I'm not like, oh, is that really your favorite color? Oh, is that really your favorite food? It's like, it's a part of a person.
Yeah.
And it feels weird that it's like one of those few parts of a person that like you have to almost like prove.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like the proof points thing also like hits home for me. I mean, my journey to go learn Cantonese was very much specifically stemmed from a desire to feel a little more grounded in my cultural identity. But part of the reason I ended up leaving early is okay. So I went to Hong Kong for 4 months last year. The original plan was to stay for a year. After 4 months, I was like pretty tired and decided to leave. Part of that was just I wanted to do other things, but part of it was this recognition that even if I get to the point of conversational fluency, there's like so many more proof points past them and like some of those are just like not practically attainable to me. For instance, like I can't go back and grow up in a multi-generational household. And that is like a pretty crucial experience for many of my friends. I also, even if I wanted to like truly call myself a Hong Konger, I would have to not only be fluent in Cantonese, I would also have to be fluent in Mandarin. And I would have to pick up like 20 years of cultural context as well, but all the media. And that's when I started to feel more of this really clear distinction between like Asian culture and like Asian American, Asian Canadian culture. And that like we also have a shared canon of media, but it's not the same shared canon.
Mm-hmm.
And there is some shared canon like from years ago, but again, I'm not going to go back and watch like 6 years of TVB dramas in Cantonese. So I started realizing that like there's no amount of proof points that is ever going to help me feel like fully grounded. And just getting to the point where I feel like truly grounded in the fact that I did put real effort into this. Like I put hundreds and hundreds of hours of intensive study into working on picking up this language. So like if anyone's going to come at me for like just pretending, be like, when's the last time you spent 800 hours specifically studying things for cultural connection? And that's never actually happened, but like I would feel grounded in that anger, and I think that would help pull certain elements of the self-doubt away. And I also thought it was really interesting that like when I met you, also quickly found out you take Hebrew lessons. And it's interesting hearing that it sounds like it's for somewhat similar reasons of almost wanting that cultural identity to be defensible.
Yeah. And I specifically wanted it to be defensible. Like I wanted it, like I don't have to, I spoke enough Hebrew that I could like whip it out enough to like show randos that I speak Hebrew.
Yeah.
But I actually specifically wanted it to be defensible to my family, like to show my Israeli family, like, no, like I am making an attempt to, even though, I've been gone for 20 some years, like I'm making an attempt to like hang on to this and to continue to be Israeli and to be able to communicate with you all and to communicate with your kids now. And
yeah,
like, I think that like there are different points of like, I don't know, the Hebrew, sometimes it's like really hard to go to Hebrew class, on a Thursday afternoon when it's like nap time. But
nap time.
I know. But like, it's like the only reason that it's remained sustainable is because I feel like I'm not proving this to anybody except for the people that I care deeply about. And it's like showing up not just as a proof of like I am. It's like, yeah, there's some of it that's like proving like I'm Israeli, but part of it is proving like, and I give a shit about that, and I care. And I think that that's something that like, I don't know. It's really interesting because like when you and I first met, I think I've told you this, but like I didn't immediately recognize you, as being Asian. And then to be fair, I like saw your back.
You didn't get it just from this?
your weird hair. But it's like, we were sitting kind of like how Kevin and I are sitting now. We were sitting for like an hour. And over the course of that hour, I was like, I am becoming increasingly confident that this person is of mixed race, but I can't quite pin it. And then I asked you for your name, and you told me your last name. I was like, I was right. I knew it. And I think like I don't know what Jamie's first impression of me was, but I took to Jamie pretty quickly. I was like, oh, good person. And like we became friends pretty quickly, but like I think that a large part of that initial like a large part of that initial trust, and I think like pull, you just get like a like social chemistry. To me, just like a lot of the things that you shared, and just the fact that you mentioned taking Cantonese, there were so many points of similarity. So it's weird because it's like I haven't been able to relate to people that are Asian on Asian things, and I haven't been able to relate to Jewish people on Judaism, and I like the halves of me, it's like the half of it, two things, whole of nothing. It's like the halves of me really I've never been able to, I think, find grounding in, but I'm increasingly finding that like this has been a really strong source of like grounding and like being biracial. I'm like, oh, it's not third culture. It's like just the idea of like I am confused and I am biracial. Like that is
united in our confusion.
Yeah, we're united in our confusion. And like just that has so many, like, no, we don't have the same cultural references, but we have so many, I think, like developmental and like similar emotional struggles. We're like, I'm angry and I don't know why. And being able to relate on those things, I was like,
Yeah.
you get it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that was like really to me I think that was definitely catalytic in like becoming friends, and
Yeah.
it's just funny because we have zero cultural background in common, but you're probably the person that I relate most to cultural.
Yeah.
It's at the meta level.
Yeah, exactly. We have the same meta culture.
The meta culture of confusion.
Yeah.
And struggle. Yeah.
What's your culture background? Confused.
Other.
Oh no.
God.
This was a question that we raised. Maybe this is something your listeners can fill in if they know the answer. Okay, so on forums there's like the race thing, and there's like all the different things that you can fill out on race, and there's all the bubbles, and you can fill in like other or whatever, or white or Middle Eastern, whatever. But then there's the ethnicity, and it's just Hispanic or non-Hispanic.
Right.
Yeah.
Why? How did that happen?
So weird.
I don't know. The U.S. government only cares about that in particular.
Yeah, I think it's super bizarre that those are the two dimensions.
Yes.
It's just like,
yeah, I don't
those
know.
are the two ethnicities, Hispanic and non-Hispanic.
Yeah.
So you know what? In some way, we're all the same race.
We're
non-Hispanic.
all of us here are defined by our non-Hispanicness.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
To the government.
Yeah.
We're all in the same.
We're all the same ethnicity. To Uncle Sam.
Yes.
Yeah. And then on some forms, we are the same race in that we are other because they don't make it multi-select because fuck that.
Yeah, I know. My favorite is they're like multiracial. I'm like, look at you. We've evolved. I am several. I'm like, you couldn't make this a multiple select? Like, that seems like it would have been so easy. Yeah, I have strong feelings about those.
just like one last note on like I think distinctly like biracial experience, and maybe you've also had, is going to like live shows, but this tends to happen especially at comedy shows when it's like a whatever ethnic comedian. I mean ethnic in the sense that they are focusing a lot on ethnicity and race as part of their bit. They'll call it be like, where are my white people in the house? Like, where are the Asians in the house? And I'm just sitting here being like, I'm just not gonna raise my hand. Like I've never felt so directly like you are none of these.
You are none of these. You're like, I don't want someone to call me a liar.
Yeah, I also don't want them to call other. Yeah.
So I had a really specific, strange version of that during my naturalization ceremony. Like when you become a U.S. citizen, they ask you to like cheer. They're like, okay, we have people from, and they'll list the countries that everyone has immigrated from, because it's like they do a naturalization ceremony that's like hundreds and hundreds of people all at the same time, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, which do I cheer with? I was like, because it would feel weird to be like, no, don't worry, I'm from both, because it's like you didn't immigrate from both places.
That's true.
But it's like, so yeah, no, there's like all these weird specific ways where it's just like it comes up in these. You're like, and it's when you're not expecting it. You're just like, oh, didn't expect that today. Right. You're just like, a warning would have been nice. Just getting warmed up for this. Yeah. Let me think about it for a moment so I know how to politically answer. Yeah. No, it's yeah. I think that being able to relate on the level of like those points of confusion has been like deeply, deeply satisfying experience. I think that the takeaway is that more interracial couples should have children and they should be our friends.
San Francisco is going to do us right on that front, I think.
And absolutely. Yes, I think you're right. You see very many interracial couples here, and it gives me so much hope, so much joy. I actually have a lot of friends specifically having mixed like Middle Eastern or Israeli and Asian kids, and I'm like, yes,
make more of me.
This is my specific form of natalism.
Oh my god. All right, I think we should start to wrap up. This has been absolutely wonderful, but I think we need to go on with the rest of our days at some point.
You don't want to just sit here and talk about government forums all day?
We can do that during the week. We, in fact, sometimes do.
Oh, do not remind me. Tomorrow is Monday. We're probably just going to do that tomorrow.
Yeah. All right. How you feeling, Kevin?
I actually was gonna say, like, my takeaway from this is that, like, I think underneath all of it, like, I think there's just a deep, like, I hear it just across, I think, all three of our stories, just like a deep desire to connect
Yeah.
with people who we view as sharing the same identity as us.
Mhm.
And there's kind of like belonging, acceptance needs that are associated with that. And yeah, it hurts, I think, when, that part of you wants to connect deeply. Because, like, I think at an identity level, if you think about it, like, that's like probably one of the deepest levels that you can connect with somebody. So I think there's something beautiful about wanting that deep level. And in theory, if it goes smoothly, it can happen really quickly too, in
Yeah.
theory. But yeah, I felt very tender, I think, when you were describing it, just because it's like it's always like the flip side is also always true when you're like, you're excited about the potential of it, you feel like it should be there, and then it's not there. It also really hurts. Um, yeah, I don't know. I feel like that was worth celebrating.
Yeah.
I think.
Doesn't.
Yeah, yeah. I think because I mean I also experienced it with a lot of like pain, a lot of it, like the anger is like defensiveness, right? Like
Mhm.
part of me wants to protect myself from like this identity level pain or damage that I'm about to take. Um, but yeah, so I'm chewing. That's what I've been chewing on
Yeah.
for the last few minutes. But
What are your energy levels at?
pretty good. I'm at like a 9 emotionally.
Whoa.
Soul resonance.
Yeah. Soul resonance.
That's how I describe connection with people. Oh, our souls were just resonated together for a second.
Yes.
Just vibrating.
I think it's great.
It was my jazz hands.
Yeah,
That's what did it.
That was the right wavelength. Yeah. Physically, I'm like an 8. Yeah, I know. Emotionally, I think tenderness, I think is the right word. Yeah, I feel tender, and I also feel tenderness towards both of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know
wanna
you?
go next?
First of all, I love that word tender. I rarely hear it or think it about emotions, but it's really, I'm mostly thinking about food. But I love it in the context of emotions. It's very sweet. I feel physically definitely less sweaty. I think
Good.
I think we've made our way back up to like 7.5 physically,
Nice.
which is great. Emotionally, I also feel I'm feeling real good, like a 9. It went up, and I think it's there's something about being able to talk about things that like end up like just bothering you, when their point of like difference, right? But then being able to talk about it as a point of connection and like being like, doesn't that suck? Is just like, it's very satisfying, you know? Like, I think it's the same reason why if you smell something bad, you're like, here, smell it,
That was great. That's pretty funny.
Oh my god.
So I feel like I just both made you smell something that I think smells bad.
Yeah.
And it's like satisfying. And I'm like, oh, now we have a shared bad, we have like a frustration towards that smell,
A stink. We share the stink now.
Yeah, we share a stink. I just don't know that I could ever say anything better than I said that, actually. But I'm also feeling like very appreciative because it's not something that I like. This specifically is not something that I ever really have the space to talk about. And even people that like want to listen and want to hear about it. And like I have very loving, understanding friends. Like just not being able to like connect about it, like it can feel emotionally exhausting. And so this is a topic that I've like really, really steered clear of and like rarely ever talk about. And so being able to talk about this, and that's why I was kind of curious. I was like, what direction is this going to end up going? Like, is this going to end up feeling restorative, which I've not really experienced, or is it going to end up being like something that ends up being a little bit draining? And I'm actually quite surprised to find myself at a higher emotional level right now. So very appreciative and surprised, I guess.
Aww.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Wow. Thanks for showing up, even though you thought it would be draining.
Yeah.
Well, there's like good draining,
Yeah.
experiences. Like you
Mhm.
go on a long run and you're like, I'm tired and I need to eat and nap, but you're glad that you did it,
Mhm.
and it was good for you. And I kind of expected this to feel a little bit like a hard run.
Mm.
But it felt like a nice little, like maybe a long walk in the park. This
Yeah.
time Jamie did not run away from me, which is incredible.
It's a story for another time.
Wow, off the record.
Off the record, yeah.
Yeah, that's how I am. Jamie?
Yeah, I'm like super emotionally high right now. I'm like a 9.
Ooh.
This is the highest average emotional state we have gotten to.
Whoa!
That checks out, yeah.
Yeah, I think, and then physically, like, I almost feel like I'm out of my body. That's like the way that I describe it. Like I just like kind of stopped being aware of my. I don't think it's stop being aware. I think I just stopped being self-conscious of like my body entirely. I just like completely fell into the conversation,
Nice.
and that was very satisfying and like enriching almost.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa!
You feel nourished?
I feel nourished. I feel nourished. Yes, that's it. I feel
Mm.
soul nourished.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Yeah, like I think that being able to connect on this specific thing with you, especially because we both have like a linguistic link here, was really satisfying because I'm able to connect on that with some of my Asian American friends as well, but there's like an added layer of internal conflict and confusion that I think um, I'm only able to get because there's like also like the internal bit of recognizing that we are not fully that identity and trying to grapple with that and not feeling at home in the community that we feel the strongest identification with. So that was like, it wasn't just about empathy, it was like commiseration and like feeling
Ooh.
connection through commiseration. It was
Mhm.
very satisfying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Misery loves company.
Yeah. 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 And like when misery is in company, sometimes it actually just like wraps all the way around to feeling like high. So
who needs drugs when you can just
yeah.
complain?
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely feeling like grateful, but like it's like a hype flavor of grateful. It's like this was great. I'm so grateful. Ah! It's that kind of feeling.
I need to go lift something heavy.
I'm so grateful. I think some of it is just joy as well. Just
Mhm.
like yeah, joy and the feeling of a very specific flavor of community.
Yeah.
That's how I'm feeling.
That is so excellent. And honestly, having listened to every episode multiple times, I'm just gonna say that this may be a record, like just not just quantitatively, but qualitatively. So you might have to actually quit the podcast now because
done.
you've
Tell all the other
emotionally
guests to
peaked.
just be like,
This is
we're
it.
out.
You're like, actually, we've become happy.
We're done.
We're done.
Satisfied.
Mission accomplished.
I know.
Mission accomplished.
We can retire now.
Jack did that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but yeah, in all seriousness,
Yeah.
thank you for this conversation. It was unexpected and really dope.
Thanks for coming on.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. I forgot that
Yeah.
that's the response.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah. No, it's been great having you. Yeah.
Yeah. I do wish it was slightly more air conditioned in here though.
It's true.
Us too.
Yeah. We're just hot people. It just
Definitely.
can't do
Yeah.
anything about it. Yeah. We bring the heat.
All right, is it time to
Yeah.
bid adieu?
I think so. Wherever you are, thank you for also tuning in and hanging out with us today. Hope you have a great rest of your day, evening. Yeah, we'll catch you next time.
Thanks.
Bye.